So Indiana and Ohio State play a big game. The winner will, in all likelihood, face Oregon in the Big Ten Championship Game, where they have, in fact, secured their spot, which we found out on Tuesday from the Big Ten because, well, tiebreakers are complicated, so why don't we cut them some slack? But Oregon would, of course, prefer to beat Washington either way and face who? Indiana? Ohio State? Couple of things to watch. First of all, if you did not know, Ohio State starting center Seth McLaughlin, no relation, has torn his Achilles, unfortunately, and he is out for the year. So Ohio State has done some reshuffling along their offensive line. They are moving last year's starting center from left guard over to center and then making a different selection at the left guard spot. Now, Jay Stevens of Locked On Buckeyes, I talked to him about this over on Locked On College Football. He feels really good about that particular move and feels like they're very capable. We shall see how that plays out. Jacob Goins of Locked On Hoosiers, meanwhile, said in the very same segment, Buckeye fans are telling me in my comment section that they don't feel good about it at all. So that makes me think, well, sometimes fans can be a little over the top, but Jay's a straight shooter. You guys remember from that week leading up to it and the shows we did over the summer? Jay will tell it like it is. Jay, before the year, thought Oregon would beat Ohio State. Then the week of the game, he tucked himself into Oregon, losing to Ohio State. But of course, well, that did not take place. Now, was that a ridiculous prediction? No, of course not. Oregon won by a point. But before the season, my conference championship predictions were Oregon and Ohio State meeting in the neutral field, and I thought Oregon would win in Eugene. And before the season, I haven't made a pick for the Big Ten Championship Game. Want to make that clear. But before the season, I thought Ohio State would probably get them back on the neutral field. Because when you have two teams that are going to play single-digit, one-possession games, you're probably going to split them. Take Oregon at home, Ohio State in the neutral site. That's still an incredibly feasible possibility. But whether or not Oregon fans should be rooting for a particular team in this game, I don't think is the right way of looking at it. By the fourth quarter, you might know whether there's a team that you'd want to win. Because, of course, there are two different outcomes here. Either Oregon is going to play a team that you feel like is going to beat the Ducks because they haven't figured out their issues from Wisconsin in the Washington game, or you feel like it might not matter, or some of you out there, several of you, as a matter of fact, have sent me messages saying, hey, should Oregon just want the 5 seed? Should they try to lose, not try to lose the Big Ten Championship Game, but is that a feasible path? Well, yes, it is. Getting the 5 seed would allow you to play the 12 seed, whoever that is. Now, previously we would have said, well, that's going to be the Group of 5 conference champion. I don't know about that. Based on the latest rankings, Boise State controls their own path to be the 4 seed. But still, if they were to get a bye as the Mountain West champion and you were the 5 seed, you'd play the 12 seed, whoever that would be. You'd play them at home at Autzen Stadium and then play Boise State in the quarterfinals and then play whoever you have to play in the semifinals. But going back to the Ohio State-Indiana question, as you watch the game, you may feel, boy, I feel like one team's more beatable than the other. Boy, I feel like this, I think Oregon would match up better with this team, or Oregon would match up better with that team in the Big Ten Championship Game, so I want that team to win. Let's say, hypothetically, it's Indiana. On paper, that's the answer to the question. They throw the ball a lot, they run it a little, and Oregon's had one of the best pass defenses in the country this year, and well, I feel really good about Oregon's defensive line against anyone, including Ohio State. So I'm curious to see how Indiana's offensive line, which has been a very underrated unit this year, I'm curious to see how they match up with Ohio State's defensive line. But I'm watching that Buckeyes offensive line. Because if they struggle with Indiana, then I'll feel supremely confident no matter who Oregon faces. And yeah, based on how Oregon plays against Washington, that'll be the ultimate determining factor for, well, how are we going to feel going into the Big Ten title game? Depends on how they play. Can they look like the team that beat Illinois 38-9 and Michigan 38-17, or are they going to look like a team that committed 12 penalties against Maryland and needed a late field goal to beat Wisconsin, albeit on the road, for their 8th straight game with Wisconsin at home off a bye? But again, if Oregon had played a better game against Wisconsin, it didn't have to be that particularly close. Should we worry about this? I'm sure some of you will be upset that I'm even talking about it. That's okay. You can feel however you want. But matchups, at the end of the day, have prevented teams that we don't think about from winning a national championship. What if Alabama had lost a game to Auburn last year and they don't play Georgia in the SEC championship game? Who would Georgia have played? I don't remember. Do you think they would have beaten them? Or do you think it was just Nick Saban that was able to beat Kirby Smart? What happens then if Georgia wins the SEC? Do they go on to win the national championship? So these sorts of things can snowball. They can absolutely matter. But I'm curious to see how that Ohio State offensive line is holding up. That's what I'm most watching for. At the end of the day, do I have a preference between the two? No. Because I think that if Oregon plays the way they're capable of, they can beat either one of those teams. Even on a neutral site. I know Oregon scraped by Ohio State, but let's not forget, they shouldn't have had their first 7 points. And Oregon came up empty in the red zone, and Oregon missed a field goal, and Oregon left 2 points out there with a missed extra point and then a failed 2-point conversion in the first half. A lot of things didn't go Oregon's way. They found a way to win the game. Now, they also kicked the ball off the up man and recovered it to get an extra 3 points back, but I don't anticipate that happening again, per se, in the Big Ten championship game. But still, if you tally up the total number of breaks that Oregon got in that October 12th matchup with the Buckeyes, a lot more went Ohio State's way than didn't. But still, can Ohio State beat Oregon? Yes. Could Oregon beat Ohio State? Absolutely. But with this Oregon defensive line, as I talked about earlier on the show, being the unquestioned strength, not just of the defense, but I think of the entire team. Like, I think that's where Dan Lanning and Tosh Lupoy want the identity of this team to be. That's what they saw when they were at their previous stops, winning national championships in the SEC. I think that's what they are building. I think that's what they have built. I think that's what this defensive line is. It is a 3-year process of recruiting and portaling and developing to get guys in there and say, okay, now we can go 6, 7, 8 deep and have a high level of production to be completely disruptive and not have to blitz all the time with linebackers and DBs as our only way of getting pressure on the quarterback. That is paramount to any great defense. You can always get pressure with 4. And Oregon has gotten pressure with 4 a lot this season. Turns out that helps your secondary a whole heck of a lot. So if Ohio State's offensive line struggles with Indiana, that will absolutely boost my confidence level. They'll have another game to get it right because they play Michigan next week, but that's the biggest thing that I look at as we kind of glance ahead to the Big Ten championship game of, does Oregon play this team or that team? Like, if it's Ohio State again, Oregon won the trenches. Oregon was able to protect Dylan Gabriel. Will Howard was sacked a few times, but Ohio State couldn't run the ball when they wanted to. And Oregon hit downfield shots, but they had time in the pocket for Dylan Gabriel to hit those shots. What happens in the second go-round if Ohio State's offensive line is significantly hindered without their starting center? I mean, think about what it would mean to this Oregon offensive line if Poncho went down with an injury. They'd be going back to Charlie Pickard, and you might see a lot of the same problems that you had earlier this year. So that's the number one thing that I'm looking for. Between Indiana and Ohio State, I frankly don't have a strong preference. There are strengths and advantages. On paper, Indiana is the team that is quote-unquote more beatable, but guess what? I think Curtis Rourke is more dangerous than Will Howard. Ohio State's receivers are more dangerous than Indiana's, but I'd rather face dangerous receivers with a good quarterback than solid receivers with a great quarterback. So this question also came in from Dylan. I wanted to answer. Who is the one team you really don't want to play? For me, Georgia still just sticks out. Also, is it hard rooting for the Mariners and Seahawks knowing who they share the city with? It's actually not, because anytime I'm in a space where I'm rooting for the Seahawks or the Mariners, nobody's got college sports on their mind. Doesn't matter. Just like the beauty of Oregon sports. When you see someone who's a Duck fan, you know nothing about them except you're a Duck fan, and that's good enough for me. So the one team that sticks out to me is absolutely Georgia. They stick out second, because the team that sticks out first to me is Alabama, and it's just because of their head coach. And there are a number of really good teams out there, but I don't fully trust Quinn Ewers at Texas. I definitely don't trust Penn State a whole heck of a lot. Georgia and Alabama, because of who they've got at head coaches and the caliber of athlete on average that is on those particular rosters, those are the teams to me that, as you start to play out all these bracket scenarios, I wouldn't want to play them. I've seen Lanning against DeBoer before with Washington's roster, and Washington's roster was really good. Got news for you, that Alabama roster doesn't stink. Curious to see how they do against Oklahoma this week, but yeah, those are the teams that stick out to me. And that sounds kind of chalk-ish, but guess what? I think they've got the best coaches out there.